My name is Autumn Bennett. I'm 36 years old, living alone in a small wooden cabin by Lake Michigan. A place I built with my own hands after years of being pushed aside by my own family. That night at my sister's extravagant wedding, under the music, the lights, and nearly 400 guests raising glasses in celebration, I was yanked by the hair and dragged straight out of the reception hall. The one who did it was my sister's fiancé. My mother stood up, fire flashing in her eyes, her voice sharp and slicing through the heavy air. "Get out. You're the last stain left in this family." No one stepped in. No one spoke up. Just the rustling of silk dresses and the sudden hush of silverware clinking against cold wood floors. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't walking away empty-handed. Have you ever been treated like a thorn to be plucked out by your own family, simply because you refused to bow your head? If you've ever been hurt by someone who shares your name, leave a comment. Hit like, subscribe to the channel if you believe that sometimes justice begins in silence. Because what happened after that night would bring their whole house of cards to its knees. As a child, I lived with my grandfather, the only man in my life who never asked me to be anyone but myself. The wooden cabin by the lake where I grew up was built by his own two hands, each plank, each nail, through bitter winters. To him, it wasn't just a shelter, it was a monument to everything he believed in: resilience, honesty, and the dignity of hard work. Every morning, he brewed strong black coffee in a dented old aluminum pot, cracked open the window to the misty lake. I'd curl up on the steps, clutching a warm mug of cocoa, listening as he read the newspaper aloud, pausing every so often to ask what I thought about something he'd read. I was only 8, but he listened like my answers mattered. And I think maybe that's where I first learned that my voice deserved to exist. My mother, Charlene, was the opposite. She never looked at me without comparing me to someone else. "Sierra listens better. She's more graceful. Sierra has taste. You keep your room like a pigsty." At first, her words stung like mosquito bites. Then they became tiny cuts, slow, deliberate wounds chipping away at whatever self-worth I had left. Sierra, my younger sister, was the angel in her eyes. When she wanted to dance, Mom enrolled her in the most expensive art center around. When she wanted a white piano, Mom took out a loan to buy it. Me. I once asked to take a sketching class at the public library. Mom just glanced up and said, "Don't waste time on that nonsense." I was used to being sidelined. But I never forgot the time I was falsely blamed when I was 16. Sierra had lost a silver bracelet and my mother immediately dragged me out, her voice shaking with rage. "Did you take it because you were jealous?" I shook my head. My throat tightened. My hands trembled so badly I couldn't button my coat. I tried to say I hadn't even stepped into Sierra's room. No one believed me except my grandfather. He walked in, looked me in the eye, then turned to my mother. "This girl doesn't lie. If Autumn says she didn't take it, then she didn't." Days later, the bracelet turned up, at the bottom of Sierra's own drawer. No apology. No correction. Mom just snapped, "This time I'll let it go. But next time, don't expect mercy." "And Sierra?" She shrugged with a sweet smile. "Oops. Must have slipped." That day I learned, truth didn't matter in our house unless it served their version of the story. My grandfather passed away quietly in the spring just after I turned 19. He left the cabin to me, not because I was the older grandchild, but because he knew I was the only one who valued every splinter in the floor, every scratch on the wood. In his will, he'd written one line by hand: "This is a gift for Autumn, the only one who always knew how to hold on to what matters with both hands." I broke down reading that line, not for the house but because someone believed in me so deeply even after they were gone. My mother didn't see it that way. "Why hold on to that old place? You're still young, you can start over. Let your sister and Ryan have a stable home." She said that more than 10 times, each time cloaked in sugary manipulation. "Think of your sister, Autumn. You're the older one, aren't you?" I didn't argue. Didn't push back. But those words marked the beginning of my distance from them. I left town, taking with me a copy of the cabin's deed and a few pieces of furniture my grandfather had made. I rented a tiny room on the edge of the city, worked 2 jobs, teaching art to kids in the morning, waiting tables at night, saving every cent to repair the cabin. On weekends, I'd catch the bus back, tools and supplies in hand. I remember the feel of patching that broken roof, running my hand along the pillar he had sanded until it gleamed like glass. I didn't fix it because the house was too old. I did it because I needed a place that reminded me who I was. I hung new curtains, painted the living room in a soft lakewater blue, rearranged the kitchen to match exactly how Grandpa had it. I didn't change the soul of the place, I just mended the cracks that time and memory had left behind. No one knew what I was doing. No one cared. My family never once asked where I was living, how I was eating, or if I was okay. But the moment Sierra got engaged to Ryan, a real estate agent out of work but smooth-talking like a snake, they suddenly remembered the cabin. That place is in such a prime spot, right on the lake, perfect for investment. I overheard Mom telling a neighbor as if she'd planned to sell it all along. And Sierra? She messaged me sweetly, if you really love me, you wouldn't cling to that house. Ryan and I need a place to start our future. I almost didn't respond. But I looked around the kitchen, the one where Grandpa used to hand me warm cookies every Sunday night. I looked up at the ceiling, at the wooden chandelier he carved himself. And I typed one word back: no. I never imagined that one refusal could turn me into the enemy. I was wrong. And the price of that refusal had only just begun. Sierra's wedding was held at a lakeside resort, barely a 20-minute drive from my cabin. But walking into that reception, I felt like I'd stepped into a world that had no place for me. Everything was too bright, too polished, too cold. White satin tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, roses everywhere with a perfume that didn't feel real. I felt out of place in my simple moss green dress. The color reminded me of the leaves around Grandpa's porch. I didn't like gowns. I didn't recognize the fake smiles of strangers I'd never met. I arrived early. I thought maybe if I stayed kind, kept the peace, things could be different. Maybe Mom would look at me like I belonged. Maybe Sierra would smile, hug me, and say, "Thanks for coming." But for almost an hour at the front reception, Sierra never appeared. I only saw Mom, Charlene, beaming at a group she called your father's old business partners. When our eyes met, she gave a tight nod, a forced smile painted over her face like old makeup. I walked toward her, but before I could say a word, she spoke loud enough for those around to hear. "You really should consider letting go of that house. Your sister needs a place to start, and you have more than enough, don't you?" I froze. Every greeting I had prepared vanished. "I came to celebrate her wedding," I said quietly, trying to stay calm. "Not talk about property." "Well, good," she snapped, not even looking at me, as if speaking to thin air. "Because that's going to be handled one way or another." I turned away, biting the inside of my cheek, hands clenched into fists under my dress. I reminded myself, don't react, don't give them a reason. I found a quiet spot near the drink bar, trying to cool the rising heat in my chest. The ceremony felt like a staged production. Sierra floated in wearing a pearl-studded white gown, arm in arm with Ryan. He wore a silver tuxedo, hair slicked, eyes darting. He spotted me and skimmed over my face like I was just the help. No nod. No word. I sipped my water, surrounded by laughter that felt miles away. Everything I'd worked so hard to protect was unraveling before my eyes in the form of cold silence. Midway through the party, as guests moved toward the dance floor, I stepped into a hallway to get some air. That's when Ryan appeared, suddenly and reeking of alcohol. "Autumn," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of all pretense. "I'm heading out," I replied, not wanting to engage. "Listen," he stepped closer, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Your sister's starting a new life. Why are you, as the big sister, still clinging to that house?" I shifted away from him. "I have nothing to say about that. This is a wedding, not a place to talk property." He gave a dry chuckle. "You're stubborn. But being stubborn doesn't earn respect, Autumn. It just makes people tired of you. Especially when that house is all you've got." I stood up straighter, my voice lower. "I owe you nothing. I owe your family nothing." He stepped half a pace closer, his rough hand suddenly gripping my arm. "Cut the act. You live alone. You're past your prime. No kids. No husband. What are you keeping that house for? Planning to die there alone?" I jerked my arm free, my voice beginning to shake. "Back off. Right now." Then everything happened too fast. Ryan grabbed my hair and yanked it back hard, throwing me off balance. Somewhere I heard a wine glass shatter. The music cut off. Conversations fell silent. I stumbled, nearly falling, but managed to grab the hallway railing. He let go after a few seconds, but they were enough. Enough for the entire room to witness it. I turned around. My mother was standing in the crowd. Her eyes were blazing, not with anger that I had been attacked, but because I was now the problem. "Get out," she said loudly, clearly, and coldly. "You are the last stain left in this family." I saw guests whispering. A few turned away. Some stared. No one came to help me. No one asked if I was okay. Sierra stood at the end of the hallway, her hands gripping her wedding dress, staring at me like I had ruined her big day. My father was sitting near the wedding cake table. He said nothing. Just lifted his glass of champagne, took a sip, and turned his face away. I bent down, picked up my purse from the floor, straightened my hair, and walked out of the reception to the sound of scattered whispers behind me like wind rustling through dry leaves. No one called out. No one followed. And the moment I stepped past the threshold, I knew they never truly wanted me back. They only wanted what I had. And I also knew from that night forward I would no longer be the same Autumn. I left the wedding in silence, my dress still carrying the scent of expensive perfume worn by people who never truly saw me as family. I drove slowly along the lakeside road, the water dark and still like glass, tree shadows streaking across my windshield like memories brushing past my thoughts. I didn't turn on the radio. No sound but the tires on asphalt and my own heartbeat in my chest. My whole body ached like someone had crushed every joint barehanded, but my mind was sharp and cold. There was nothing left to cry about. Nothing left to explain. Only the preparation ahead. When I got home, the wooden cabin was dark and still, waiting for me like the last friend who hadn't left. I turned on the porch light, locked the car, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me like I was shutting out a world already dead. I took off my shoes, hung my coat, then sat at the kitchen table, still in my dress without washing my face. My hand rested on the tabletop, gently stroking the wood my grandfather used to polish with handmade oil. For a brief moment, I imagined what he'd say if he were still here. Maybe he'd just rest a hand on my shoulder, squeeze gently, and say, "No more running, Autumn. Now it's time to stand tall." I opened my laptop. First, the messages. I backed up every recent conversation with Mom and Sierra. Mom's texts always started sweet but ended in pressure. "The family needs your understanding. You live alone. Shouldn't the house go to someone with a family?" Sierra's messages were sugary with a hint of challenge. "I don't understand how you can be this selfish. It's my big day. Can't you give me Grandpa's last gift?" I saved every screenshot, then moved on to social media posts. On Facebook, Charlene had posted a picture of the whole family without me, smiling brightly together, captioned, "Nothing is more precious than family. But sometimes family is the knife in your back." The comments flooded in. "Poor Charlene, hope the older daughter comes to her senses. Some children are born only to hurt their mothers." I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I just saved it all. Every line, every word, every photo. Evidence for a battle I didn't start but was now forced to fight. The next morning, I opened the door to collect the mail like usual. Amid the pile of flyers and bills was a plain white envelope, no sender listed. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet printed from a computer, the font cold and sharp like a verdict: "Hand over the house or we will destroy you." No name. No signature. But I knew. I knew exactly who had the heart to send that without blinking. I sat down, still holding the letter, my heart beating slow and steady. No fear. No anger. Just a deep, absolute stillness. The stillness of someone who finally understood. This was no longer a family matter. This was a hostile takeover. I went to the bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept important documents. I pulled out the original deed, a copy of my grandfather's will, and a folder with receipts from every repair I had paid for during the house restoration. Every can of paint, every wooden board, every electrical visit. I had kept the bills. Not because I expected this, but because I had always been used to proving my worth. I spent the whole afternoon searching online, reading every page of local law firms. I wasn't looking for someone flashy. I wanted someone who understood cases of family asset coercion, something most people don't even think is real, but it happens everywhere. I stopped when I saw the name Karen Fields. Her website wasn't glamorous, but her credentials were sharp. At the top of her page was a quote I immediately saved: "The law doesn't care if it's a stranger or your blood. If they're trying to take what isn't theirs, the answer is the same." I picked up the phone and called her office. The receptionist answered with a professional but gentle tone. I introduced myself, said I needed counsel for a case involving family property coercion. There was a brief silence on the other end, then she asked, "Can you come to the office? Mrs. Fields would like to meet in person. It sounds like you're going through something heavy." I nodded even though she couldn't see it. "I'll be there. Tomorrow." That afternoon I printed everything I had saved: messages, screenshots, anonymous letter, online posts. I organized each stack, labeled and clean. When I zipped the file into my handbag, I realized this feeling was familiar. Like when I was a little girl, clutching a school folder on the first rainy day of the season, just hoping the pages wouldn't get wet. It was the same now. But what I was protecting was my life. And I wasn't going to let anyone wet it, tear it, or burn it again. That morning, when I stepped into my usual coffee shop on Riverbend Avenue, the young waitress wiping tables suddenly froze. She whispered something to her coworker, then avoided my gaze as I approached the counter. My cappuccino, which usually came with a little heart drawn in the milk foam, had none, just a blank swirl of white. I picked it up silently and went to my usual table by the window. Outside, the sky was clear blue, but inside me was a storm cloud heavy with weight. I opened my laptop, barely checked my email before my phone rang. No caller ID. I nearly let it go to voicemail, until I heard the angry male voice on the line. "You're a damn snake. Think living alone makes you noble? You're ungrateful, a traitor to your own blood. Just wait. Everyone's gonna see who you really are." I hung up. Right after came a text from an unknown number. "God doesn't forgive those who betray blood." I closed my eyes, trying to find my breath again. I wasn't surprised, just deeply saddened because I already knew who had poisoned the air like that. The next day during Sunday service, I still went to church as usual. Not because I needed forgiveness, but because I needed to hold on to what once anchored me. When I walked in, no one whispered, no one turned. But the air had changed. A silence I'd only heard at funerals. As the sermon began, Pastor Graham stood, his eyes sweeping the congregation. We live in times where respect for family is being tested. Some among us were once cherished, once shown love, but have now chosen the path of cold hearts and ungratefulness. No one needed to look directly at me. I could feel every averted glance, every uneasy posture, every fake attempt to focus on the organ. I sat there, eyes forward, fingers tightly clutching the green handkerchief in my pocket. I didn't leave. I didn't bow my head. I simply pulled out my phone and hit record. That afternoon, a video began spreading on Facebook. Me standing in the wedding hall entrance, Ryan staggering, clutching his head, and then my hand flinging forward, my face contorted in fury. The clip ended there. No footage of him yanking my hair, no sound of my mother's insults, no image of Sierra watching me get shoved out like some homewrecker. Just one picture. Autumn Bennett, middle-aged, single, attacking her brother-in-law on a wedding day. I sat in my living room, warm yellow lamplight glowing over old photos with Grandpa, pictures of the house when I first began restoring it. I scrolled through texts and online comments, clearly unstable. If I were the mom, I'd have disowned her long ago. That house probably isn't even hers. I picked up the phone and called Fields. "Karen, I want to file a formal defamation complaint. And I want to request a restraining order." "We have more than enough evidence," she said calmly. "I'll start preparing the documents first thing in the morning." I nodded, my fingers gripping the edge of the table, feeling the grain of the wood like a quiet reminder that some things in life stay whole, if you fight hard enough to keep them. About 2 days later, an unfamiliar email popped up in my inbox. Subject: the past. The truth. Ryan's not who he seems. The sender was Leah Clarkson. She wrote, "I dated Ryan back in 2018. He hit me, then threatened to ruin my career in real estate if I ever told anyone. I stayed silent out of fear. But yesterday I saw that video of you spreading online, and I knew he was using the same old tactics." She attached an internal report from Ryan's former company, documenting an investigation into him for stealing client records. The case was buried due to lack of witnesses. But Leah added one more thing. "A friend of mine works at East Point Development. She said Ryan is trying to close a deal worth over $3 million, but only if he can gain control of the lakeside property you own. Your house sits at the key junction of the expansion zone. If you sign it over, he's set to receive a 5% bonus. I reread that part like my eyes were deceiving me. But they weren't. Everything fit. Every missing piece of a game I didn't even know I was playing. They never needed me. Never wanted me back. All they wanted was the land. Land my grandfather picked over 30 years ago, not for investment, but because it was peaceful enough for an old man to live out his final days in dignity. I picked up my phone and called Karen back. I need an independent appraisal of the land. And I want a full investigation into Ryan's transactions for the past 6 months. Autumn, she said slowly, are you prepared to take this all the way? I looked out the window. The wind skimmed through the trees by the lake, the water rippling in quiet circles. I thought of my grandfather. I thought of my hair being yanked back amid music and whispers. I thought of every nail I hammered into that floor. I'm not going far, I said. I'm just going exactly where I belong. The town council meeting was held that Tuesday afternoon in a tin-roofed wooden room beside the public library, the same place that once hosted flower shows and fall fairs. That day, every seat was filled. People stood packed along the hallway, leaning against the time-worn railings of wooden benches. I stepped in, gripping my brown file folder, my heart steady. As expected, my mother stood by the podium. Her silver hair pinned neatly, her expression mournful, hand pressed to her chest as if carrying some invisible sorrow. Ryan stood beside her in a black suit, his expression solemn, his eyes darting toward me like he was counting my every breath. We didn't want to bring family issues into the public sphere, my mother began, voice strained. But when someone in the community deliberately lets a property deteriorate, refuses to cooperate, and obstructs the lakeside development plan, I believe the council deserves to know the truth. A few heads nodded. One woman with a clerk's badge gave a knowing nod, as if she'd already heard the accusations. Ryan stepped forward, speaking with clarity. We're trying to create a welcoming residential area with parks for kids, walking paths for seniors. But some individuals not only refuse to cooperate, they actively block progress out of selfish motives. I stayed quiet. I waited for them to lay all their cards down. I saw Sierra near the back of the room, arms crossed, eyes red, like an actor waiting for her cue. The air grew thick, every stare pressing against the fabric of my coat. Then the chairman, Mr. Mitchell, spoke up. Bennett, you're here. Would you like to respond? I stood, each step sinking into the wood floor like roots. At the podium, I placed my folder down, pulled out a large printed zoning map, and unfolded it with a crisp rustle. I set a flash drive on the table before the chairman. On this drive, I began, is a recording of a phone call between Ryan Walker and a representative from East Point Development, discussing an illegal sale of land that is not under his legal ownership. A stir ran through the crowd. Ryan took a step toward me, but I locked eyes with him and didn't blink. The lakeside house and its accompanying land is legally inherited property from my grandfather, protected under a separate deed and will. Ryan Walker has no right to negotiate any contracts involving it, and certainly no right to slander me in public. My mother stepped back half a pace. Sierra scowled, lips tightly pressed. I continued, voice low and steady. Additionally, I've submitted a restraining order request against certain family members after receiving anonymous threats, doctored videos, and defamatory messages, all of which have been included in my official complaint. Silence fell. I placed a stack of printed evidence on the council's side table. An internal violence report on Ryan, a victim statement from his ex, and the draft contract he intended to secure with East Point upon acquiring my land. I looked around the room slowly. I am a resident of this town, I said. I pay my taxes. I maintain my home. I owe no one anything. And if anyone here feels inconvenienced by my decision to protect what is lawfully mine, let me be clear, I will not back down. Ryan opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. If anyone continues spreading falsehoods, using these meetings to shame me, or enabling someone under financial investigation like Ryan Walker, I will not only expose every piece of evidence, I will take it to court. The room fell completely silent. The chairman looked at me, then at Ryan. He tapped his gavel lightly. We'll need time to review all submitted materials. Until an official decision is made, no personal disputes will be tolerated in public meetings. I nodded and returned to my seat amid whispers and murmurs. As I passed Sierra, she looked away. Ryan slumped into his chair, fists clenched under his chin. My mother remained standing, face pale, hand gripping the nearest chair to keep herself upright. I sat down and exhaled slowly. My fingers brushed the soft fabric of the green handkerchief in my coat pocket, the only thing I've carried with me since my grandfather died. The air around me didn't feel suffocating. The townspeople's eyes, though not fully warm, no longer looked at me like I was something shameful. That evening, after the town council meeting, I returned home feeling both drained and strangely awake. The sky was fully dark now, the wind from the lake rustling through the pine trees by the porch, slipping through every window crack like it was trying to sweep away the last remnants of a long day. I took off my shoes, hung up my coat, and stood still in the kitchen, staring up at the old ceiling my grandfather once painted by hand. Everything in the house looked just as it had since I began restoring it. The polished pinewood countertops, the moss-green curtains swaying gently whenever the breeze slipped in. I grabbed the kettle, turned on the stove to make tea, and as if guided by something unseen, I walked toward the corner of the kitchen, where the wooden paneling had been pieced together with long boards my grandfather had hammered himself. One small panel behind the gas stove seemed slightly off, looser than the rest. I ran my fingernail along its edge. It shifted. My heartbeat slowed. I pulled a little harder. Behind the panel was a small hollow space. Inside was a thick, yellowed envelope tied neatly with a faded silver ribbon. I pulled it out and opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter in a slanted script I recognized instantly, likely written more than a decade ago. My dearest Autumn, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer with you. And I'm sorry for not telling you this sooner. But I knew. Some things should only be revealed when you're strong enough to understand them. I slid down to sit on the kitchen floor, back against the refrigerator, palms damp. The next line made my chest tighten. I know Charlene. I know Sierra. I know they may never look at you with fairness. You're the only one in this family who doesn't know how to pretend. That's a good thing, but it makes you vulnerable. This house, this land, I left it to you not just because I love you most, but because I believe you're the only one who will protect what it truly means. Near the bottom of the letter, a sentence was underlined twice in smudged red ink. In the bottom drawer of the old wooden cabinet by the entryway, there's a bank key. Safety deposit box number 342 at Michigan National Bank. If things don't go smoothly, go there. I laid the letter on the kitchen table and sat in silence for a long while. Then I stood, walked over to the cabinet where he used to keep his gardening shoes, and pulled open the bottom drawer. Beneath a sheet of old drawer liner was a small brass key with a faded plastic tag. Michigan National Bank, Box 342. The next morning I went to the bank. The receptionist gave a polite but distant smile as I handed over the documents, but when she noticed the key's distinct markings, her expression shifted. After confirming my identity, she led me down to the basement, where rows of safety deposit boxes lined the cold stone walls. Box 342 was near the end, level with my shoulder. When the lock clicked open, the thick door creaked and a faint scent of old paper drifted out. Inside was a small wooden box and a few worn file folders. I opened the box first. Inside was the original deed to the lakeside property in my name, fully notarized with an addendum clause. Property may only be transferred if heir, Autumn Bennett, signs with full unconditional consent. Any coercion, manipulation, or psychological pressure influencing Ms. Bennett's decision will be considered a legal violation. Beneath was the signature and seal of Attorney Jonathan Hewitt, from a law office in Lansing, Michigan. A supplemental document included a letter between my grandfather and Mr. Hewitt where my grandfather wrote, "I don't want to see that girl stripped of what she's preserved with her whole heart. Charlene will never stop trying to reclaim the house, citing whatever excuse she calls family. But Autumn, she's different. She won't speak up unless cornered. I need her protected by the law, not by emotion." I turned to the last page. An old photograph. Me and my grandfather on the porch. I must have been about 8, wearing a green sweater he'd knit for Christmas. We were both smiling, the afternoon sun glowing on our cheeks, his eyes looking at me like lanterns on a winter night. On the back in his handwriting it read, "If you've found this, don't be afraid. I believe you'll stand strong." I sat in that quiet basement for a long time, holding the wooden box close to my chest, eyes closed, letting his words sink into the cracks of my heart. Some love doesn't need to be spoken. Some protection is quieter, but stronger than any promise ever made. When I stepped out of the bank, the sky had turned gray. I gripped the file box tightly and looked up at the heavy clouds overhead. They could keep spinning their lies. They could keep putting on their show, trying to humiliate me, repaint me into whatever image suited their story. But from this moment forward, I had more than hope. I had proof. I had the law. And I had a legacy more powerful than anything they'd ever touched. The court hearing was scheduled for Monday morning at the Jackson County Courthouse. I arrived early. It was still chilly, the pale sun just beginning to break through the trees. I wore a simple charcoal dress, my hair pinned back, a leather case in hand containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered and organized over the past few months. Fields was already waiting in the holding room. She stood when she saw me, gently placed her hand on my arm, her expression calm and steady. "We're not here to wage war," she said. "We're here to clarify the truth." I nodded. But deep down I knew, some battles don't start with guns, yet leave wounds deeper than any blade. The courtroom was spacious, with a high ceiling and cold white lights shining over dark wood benches. My mother sat on the plaintiff's side, dressed in a pale beige suit, hair combed neatly, face looking older than usual, eyes rimmed in eyeliner, puffy and red. Sierra sat next to her, clutching a tissue, shoulders trembling like she was swallowing something bitter. Ryan showed up late, in a dark blue suit, expressionless, but his eyes, still as cold as when he last glared at me during the wedding. On my side there was just MS. Fields and me. We didn't need a crowd. We just needed the truth. Their lawyer began in a voice soft as velvet, but every word pricked like a needle. "My client, Charlene Bennett, raised the defendant with love and expectations. However, due to recent signs of emotional instability and a documented act of public violence during a family event, she and her younger daughter, Ms. Sierra Walker, are forced to request the transfer of the house to preserve the family's stability and mental well-being." I said nothing. I looked straight at my mother as the phrase, "emotional instability," was repeated 3 times in 5 minutes. She didn't shed a single tear, but her hands clenched the hem of her jacket like she was trying to convince herself it all made sense. Then Sierra was called to the stand. She stood at the witness podium, eyes rimmed red, voice hoarse. "My sister. She's not the same person we used to know. She's isolated, withdrawn, refused every attempt to reconnect. I just want the house to be used properly, like Grandpa wanted, for a young family to begin again." "And you believe the person he chose to inherit it isn't worthy?" Fields asked, her gaze steady. "I think he didn't see the whole picture back then," Sierra stammered, stepping back. "We'll show the court he saw very clearly," Fields said, then turned to me with a subtle nod. I stood, reached into my bag for the prepared USB and walked to the podium. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "I'm not here to play the victim or fight for possession. I'm here to defend what my grandfather believed in. This is the original footage from the wedding party, unedited." The video played on the large screen in the courtroom. In it, Ryan clearly approached me with threatening words. I stepped back, my voice calm, and then the scene showed him yanking my hair in front of dozens of guests. The music stopped. People screamed. And finally, my mother's voice rang out, "Get out." Whispers rose around the courtroom. Some of the people who had initially come just to observe out of curiosity now looked visibly shaken. Mrs. Fields continued presenting our case. One by one, she laid out the evidence. Text messages, anonymous letters, defamatory social media posts from accounts linked to Sierra. Financial records showing Ryan had been negotiating the sale of the land to a development company as a future representative. The scanned contract draft was shown clearly on the screen. Handwritten notes by Ryan himself. "This isn't just a scheme to seize property, Mrs. Fields said, her voice ringing like a bell. "This is a calculated abuse of family ties to coerce a transfer through deception, defamation, and psychological manipulation." Then she called a surprise witness. Leah Clarkson entered, her hair cropped short, her eyes deep but steady. She testified about the months she lived with Ryan, the threats, the slaps, and being forced into silence. She submitted internal documents from her former company and a recording of Ryan admitting he slapped her to knock some sense into her. No one was laughing anymore. Ryan froze, his face flushed red, eyes darting around the room. When I was invited to make my final statement, I said only one thing. I didn't want to be here. I stayed silent for a long time, hoping family ties would change things. But when silence is abused, when sacred bonds are weaponized for greed, I'm left with no choice but to protect myself. The judge, a silver-haired man with glasses in a thin metal frame, read the verdict in near silence. This court finds the defendant's evidence credible, clear, and grounded in both legal and moral justification. The petition for the transfer of the house is denied. Full ownership of the property remains with Ms. Autumn Bennett unconditionally. I exhaled as if finally breathing for the first time in months. My mother lowered her head. Sierra cried. Ryan stood and left without a word. I sat still, gently clutching the green handkerchief in my pocket, feeling my heart calm like a lake at dawn, untouched by wind. No amount of justifications, no carefully rehearsed act. None of it could hide the light of truth now. News of the trial spread faster than I expected. 2 days after the verdict was announced, I received an email from a local journalist. She asked if I wanted to make a public statement since the court records are now public, and the media will inevitably get involved. I declined. I didn't need anyone to defend me, nor did I want this to become some kind of headline spectacle. But I knew undercurrents had been set in motion. Just a week later, Ryan was officially summoned by the Michigan State Financial Investigation Bureau. Based on the documentation Leah had provided, combined with the materials I had submitted to the court, police uncovered suspicious transactions connected to his accounts. Untraceable funds, a contract with a real estate firm signed under unauthorized representation, and evidence that he had used his fiancé's name to gain access to private assets. I read the update on the court's website at 6 in the morning, as the sun just began to filter through the trees by the lake, casting soft shadows on my kitchen floor. It was just a short line. Ryan Walker is under investigation for suspected money laundering, falsifying legal documents, and attempting to acquire property through fraudulent marriage. I didn't feel triumphant. I just sat there quietly, holding the ceramic mug with my grandfather's words printed on it. Truth doesn't need to scream. By late afternoon, while I was trimming the lavender bushes on the porch, a worn silver car pulled up slowly in front of my gate. The door opened. Charlene stepped out first, still wearing her old leather gloves, but without the usual commanding presence. Sierra followed, unsteady, the thin coat on her shoulders wrinkled and tired. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my hands, and said nothing. They walked up to the weathered wooden fence, chosen by my grandfather because, as he said, it's strong, but it doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Autumn. My mother spoke first, her voice hoarse like someone who hadn't slept in days. We need to talk. I didn't respond. Just stood still, my hand resting gently on the wooden gate, not opening it. Sierra looked down, her voice thick. We have nowhere to go. The house was mortgaged to Ryan. He drained our savings. Mom, she doesn't have the strength anymore. Charlene clutched her purse, eyes avoiding mine. I know I was wrong. I let my pride blur everything. But you're my daughter. You can't keep punishing us forever. I looked at the two women who once meant everything to me, who then turned me into a shadow in my own family. I could see their regret. But I also saw what they wouldn't say out loud, that if they weren't desperate, they would have never come back to this gate. I'm not angry, I said slowly. I forgive if that brings someone peace. But this house has no room left for deception. Neither of them spoke. Charlene pressed her lips together. Sierra lowered her head. I lived for years without anyone checking in. I was dragged by the hair out of a wedding and neither of you stepped in. Now when everything's fallen apart, you come here asking me to open this gate. Charlene placed her hand on the fence. I'm not here asking for the house, Autumn. I just wanted to hear your voice, just once, not through a courtroom. I nodded. Then hear this clearly. I'm still here. I've held on to what Grandpa taught me. I'm not bitter. But I haven't forgotten. I didn't open the gate. I didn't send them away either. I simply turned, walked back into the house and let the front door close gently behind me. Not slammed. Not locked. Just a boundary that needed to be there. In the kitchen, the kettle had just begun to whistle. I poured tea, set it beside the open notebook on the table. I glanced out the window. They had returned to the car. Sierra rested her forehead on her hand, and Charlene stared at the house for a long while. Then the engine started and the car drove slowly down the dirt road out of town. I didn't cry. I wasn't relieved. I just felt still, like the surface of a lake in early fall. Maybe because I knew, no matter how many times they knocked, I would never lose myself again. Grandpa once told me, "No one can hurt you unless you hand them the key." I spent the following week restoring his old room. It had sat empty for years, the paint peeling, the floorboards warped from moisture. I replaced every plank, repainted the walls a soft ivory he always liked, and cleaned the window that looked out toward the lake, his favorite reading spot each afternoon. I took the old photo of him sitting on the porch, cup of tea in hand, eyes distant but lips curled in a quiet smile, and framed it carefully. I hung it above the bed. Beside it sat the old desk lamp he assembled himself, still working after all these years. When I turned it on that first night in the newly restored room, its warm glow made my chest tighten with something close to peace. I placed a thick leather-bound journal on the desk. Blank pages. I didn't use a computer. I wanted to write by hand, like each stroke was a quiet conversation with the past. Every morning I rose early, brewed a strong cup of black coffee, and sat in the chair by the window where Grandpa used to sit, looking out over the lake, still as glass. The leaves had started to change. Fall had finally arrived, the season named after me. The wind whispered gently through the pine trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and a trace of wild flowers. Every morning like this, I'd open my journal and write out each chapter of my life. No bitterness, no embellishment, just the truth. I wrote about Grandpa, about this house, about every crack in the wall I had patched with my own hands, and about the empty spaces in my heart I once tried to fill with silence. One morning, while I was writing about the time Sierra falsely accused me when I was 16, my hand froze mid-sentence. Not out of anger, but because I suddenly remembered Grandpa's eyes back then, eyes that never once doubted me, not even for a second. That gaze became the light that led me through the darkest parts of my life. And now, in this house, I don't write to accuse anyone. I write to preserve memories just the way he lived them, with trust and unwavering quiet strength. In the afternoons, I tend to the backyard where I've planted a few rows of carrots and kale. I added a long bench beneath the old maple tree, the one Grandpa used to call the perfect spot to hear the birds without anyone bothering you. From there, I can see the whole house, hear the creak of the wooden door when the breeze comes through, hear the floorboards groan like his slow footsteps in the kitchen. I no longer lock the gate. But I don't open the door to anyone who doesn't deserve it. The ones who left can come back, but only if they return with honesty in their hearts. Otherwise, I don't need them in my life anymore. Above the fireplace, I hung a carved wooden plaque, taken straight from Grandpa's old notebook. It reads, "Don't let your name live in the mouths of those who can't meet your eyes." At the end of the journal, I wrote a single line, then set down my pen and made myself a warm cup of tea. Sometimes family isn't about more blood. It's about honesty and respect. And if they can't give you that, they don't deserve a place in your life. I sat there, the evening light filtering through the window, silent. I didn't need an audience. I didn't need praise. I just needed to know I'd kept my promise to Grandpa. And that I was still here, living, writing, and no longer afraid. What do you think, when your own family stops being a place to lean on, and instead becomes the ultimate test of trust? Have you ever been in a situation where simply standing up for yourself meant being seen as the traitor? I share this story not to cast blame, not to seek pity, but because somewhere out there I know there are others like me. People who've been treated as the thorn in the bloodline, simply for refusing to stay silent. If you've ever been misunderstood or excluded from your family's table just because you stayed true to your own voice, share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your story because sometimes, through genuine listening, we can find our way back to one another through all the hurt. And if what I've shared today touched something deep inside you, don't forget to subscribe and stay with me for more stories like this. Honest moments from real life where family isn't just about blood, but about choosing every day between kindness and pretense.